A big part of my job, like most trades, are power tools. And the power tools I use remain mostly unchanged for the first half of my career. I started off with a rotary polisher, and at that time it was a monster Rupes LH22E, an absolute beast. Very big, very heavy, very bulky. For the time it was very smooth and very efficient. Compared to modern tools, it was a dinosaur. But I used that very, very reliable tool flat out for about 5 years, and then switched to a Makita 922-7CB, and that was a lighter machine that was more compact. I also found it just a little bit better balanced for me. And so for about the first 10 years of my trade, it was rotary polisher only. Rotary for cutting, rotary for finishing, sometimes rotary for applying waxes and things. And as tough as it was trying to correct cars only with a rotary polisher and some of the more simple machines that we had back then, it was setting a good foundation, giving me some skill that would benefit me when I got better machines later on as they were invented. Around the early noughties, I started to experiment with different machines, and I had a Festool ROtex. I was lucky enough to have a Festool ROtex, the first version of that machine, and I pulled it all apart. It had been used for timber, for sanding timber. I pulled that all apart and put some foam pads on it and attempted to correct some paintwork with it. Actually got some half decent results. It wasn't the best, I didn't know at the time, but the backing plate and the pad and the polish and the combination and the speeds I was using went right. But I was getting good results, almost as good as what I was getting with the rotary polisher within a few minutes. I then tried some different tools. Rupes had a sander, a random orbit machine. It wasn't referred to as a polisher. No one was polishing cars. Back in the year 2000, no one was polishing cars with a sander. If people were doing it, they were few and far between, very, very rare. And even though at the time I had the internet and I was connected to people around the world and talking about detailing, no one had mentioned it. I started bringing sanders to jobs, and one panel shop owner mentioned to me, he said, I can't pay you as a professional detailer if you're going to use sanders to polish cars. And I said, look, I have rotary polishers, I have the professional machines. I just find that there are some paint types where this is beneficial, and I'm just testing and trying things out. You know me, I don't damage cars, I'm good at what I do, and it shouldn't really matter how I get the end result that I get for you, as long as I do that, don't you think? And he was good about it, and he said, yes, okay. And I remember he just found it wacky that I would be using a sander, a random orbit, what we call a random orbit polisher now, to polish paintwork. That was a guy who knew his stuff. He'd operated a panel shop at that time for decades. So he knew what he was talking about, and he found it wacky, and not because he was silly, he just had never seen a sander being used to polish paint before. Things got really serious when I understood how to use the Festool ROtex much better. I had a second version in the mid-noughties, and that was a little bit better than the first. Not much, just a little bit smoother, maybe perhaps a little bit more powerful, but the basic mechanism was the same and the end result was the same. It made it easier to switch from force rotation to random orbit mode, and that was a trick I used for a long, long time. Some people couldn't figure out how I was correcting paint so efficiently and getting such great finishes on them. And one of the tricks that I've told a few people along the way, but I don't think I've made very public, which I'll do now, which was to use the Festool ROtex in force rotation mode. Get your correction done as much as possible. So basically breaking the abrasives down and doing most of the correction, and then switching over to RO mode and finishing up in RO mode. And that made a huge difference. And for some tricky paintwork, I especially remember Japanese imports that I was doing at the time, it was so tricky. And that trick with that machine, with the polishers and pads that I was using at the time, saved me so much effort and gave me a finish in far less time that I could otherwise not achieve. That was a trick I used for a good almost 10 years, at least 5 years. I actually contacted Festool and asked them if I could retail their products. I was only interested in retailing the ROtex 150 and ROtex 125 to sell to you customers because they were such great tools and there was nothing else like them at the time. And Festool thought it was a joke. They wouldn't let me resell machines because they wanted me to stock a whole range of products for timber and metal and things, which I didn't want circular saws. I didn't want anything else. I only wanted these two machines. And B, they just thought I was crazy. Still, Festool didn't recognise that these machines could be seriously used for polishing cars, at least not Festool Australia. Later on, Festool would come out with specific backing plates, specific polishing pads, and even a line of polishing compounds. But by then, it was too late. We had an abundance of different cheaper and better options, not for forced rotation, but for random orbit polishers in general. The Festool ROtex, which retailed in Australia in the mid-noughties for $1,000, was just simply too expensive. Still, having said that, I think I sold about 100 of those machines. If you're watching this now, you might be a customer who had bought one of the Festool ROtex machines, and albeit pricey, you will have to admit, and please comment if you're watching this, it was a great device. I constantly have customers telling me they still have the Festool, it's still working, and they're still getting great results out of it. It appears later that Bosch bought or had licensed the forced rotation technology from Festool. I don't know. This might be wrong. But Bosch had a machine, and from memory, it was called the GEX150T, and it was so similar to what a Festool ROtex was, but much cheaper, about half the price in Australia anyway. For two reasons, I didn't get along very well with it. It rotated the opposite way to the Festool ROtex, and muscle memory just didn't like that. It was also very, very loud. It had a shriek to it, and very agricultural in comparison to the Festool ROtex. So as a professional, the $500 or so difference wasn't much for me, and I would just rather buy and use the more expensive product. But for customers, many customers, at least another 100 customers bought the Bosch GEX150T, I think that's the model number, which is basically Bosch's version of the Festool ROtex, and very, very popular machine for many years. There are also at least 100 machines sold. I think it was a Bosch PEX. It was an even cheaper and even smaller machine, no force rotation mode, but many customers use those, got great results out of them, very good bang for buck machine. That was very popular around the late noughties. Now I've settled on two types of machine: random orbit, non-force rotation, and rotary polishers. Most of the time I'm using the rotary polisher. I've never stopped loving the rotary polisher because it is the most compact and the lightest machine I have, with the most power, the most efficiency, and the best balance. So it's the least fatiguing machine to use. I get more per minute out of a rotary polisher than I do out of any other machine. The main benefit with a rotary polisher is its speed. Its ability to correct fast is exactly what you want, in my opinion, when you're a professional detailer. Every day you go to work and you try to achieve as much correction as you can in the time that you have available to you, and this machine does that. Second to that, but not much less important, is the precision available with this machine. A rotary polisher's pad doesn't move, it spins circular, it doesn't orbit from center. So wherever you happen to put that pad, that's where your correction is done, and only where your correction is done. I'm able to attack details and run right up to the edges of panels. I'm able to go around corners and protrusions like door handles without knocking into them. Wherever I put that pad, that's where the correction is getting done. It's not orbiting away from center. So that precision allows me to have a lot more control, and that's important. And the ability to attach any size pad to this machine. I've got everything from 10 millimeters diameter to 180 millimeters diameter on here. No other machine will allow that. The only downside, as I've said before, is it requires a huge level of skill. You can finish cars with a rotary polisher. Anyone that says that a rotary polisher will leave holograms is just flat out wrong, objectively wrong. But having said that, you're likely, if you don't have a very high skill level, to have side effects from using a rotary polisher, such as hologramming. It's not the machine's fault, it's the operator's inability to use a machine that requires a very high skill level. The issue with generating heat on paintwork with a rotary polisher is kind of blown out of proportion, because I can, for the same amount of time, with the same amount of pressure, generate the same amount of heat with a rotary polisher as I can with a random orbit polisher with an orbit greater than 18 millimeters. So a long throw random orbit will generate the same heat, i.e. you have the same risk in relation to generating heat that you will with a rotary polisher. Another tool I love is the 8mm random orbital, and I especially love this one, the Velvet Revolver. This is a custom-made product using everything that I learnt at the time and solving all the issues with current offerings. This had a 900 watt motor that's quite powerful for a RO, and it was no problem for it to spin a small 75mm or 3-inch roughly backing plate, or 135mm, or that's 5-inch pads. So it'll tackle glass polishing, entire vehicles, and the body of the machine was super compact and ergonomic. Button placement's perfect. It had feet to securely rest the machine. The cord was the right length, and everything was about this machine was perfect, especially the price. The price undercut almost everything, and as a result, we sold these in huge volume and everywhere. For countries that don't have 240 volt mains power, we found these adapted step down to 110 volt. The Velvet Revolver was a loss leader, but it was part of a profitable system. We still have stock of the Velvet Revolver as a filming, but it's unlikely that we'll continue to manufacture this machine. Long live the Velvet Revolver. It's a special machine and such an important milestone for me personally in my career as a businessman, and for Final Inspection as a company, our first power tool, something that was recognized as a very, very good product. And just a special machine. Still use it almost every day, mainly for its 75mm pad and its ability to be used single-handedly without almost not thinking. It's so forgiving and light and easy to use. Very, very important, very good machine, very handy to have, and at the price it's sold for, every budding detailer should have one. Up from the Velvet Revolver is our new Betelgeuse, which is a 15mm RO. Some mild improvements over the Velvet Revolver. It is a slightly more expensive machine, but it has a more powerful motor that's simultaneously quieter and smoother. So to reliably and happily spin 150mm pads, achieving much greater efficiency than the Velvet Revolver due to the combination of a larger pad spinning at the same rate. Betelgeuse users who also own the Velvet Revolver have stated that they aren't comparable. Instead, they have relegated the Velvet Revolver to 90mm pad duties, and I'd agree that VR and Betelgeuse are a great combination, using this for the bulk of the work and using your old Velvet Revolver for fine detail. They work together very, very well. You don't have to swap backing pads out, and you've got some redundancy there in case one machine happens to fail. It's also good to, if you're doing big jobs and you're working all day, to give the machines a rest, and choosing one over the other is nice to mix it up that way. At the top, we've got our new 21mm throw Titan, big beast. This was released partly because these long throw machines are all the rage because they're popular. Don't get me wrong, they are super useful and every detailer should have one alongside and after they've purchased all the other machines mentioned. But these are usually the first machines to be bought by amateur detailers who confuse bigger with better. In the same way, I like to use analogies. Amateur photographers will confuse more megapixels with better photographs. That's not. Bigger throw doesn't mean the machine is better. It just means it has a more niche job. Always the right tool for the right job is the most important thing. The job of a long throw machine is mainly to correct large flat surfaces quickly, and that's useful, but completing a correction with only one long throw RO properly just isn't possible. You can use only a 21mm throw random orbit polisher to correct paint on a car, on a detail, but you're polishing at the closest 21mm away, roughly 21mm away from any detail on the car, such as a door handle. Any closer and the pad is going to smash into that protrusion at the rate of speed you're set to. Because you have an orbit and that pad is moving away from center, it doesn't stay like the rotary polisher where you put it, and you have no control over it. It is randomly moving away from center. And the more it moves, the less control you have around fine detail. So if you attempt to use it on, for instance, a vertical panel and you have a horizontal protrusion like a door handle, you're unable to correct right up close to that door handle like you would with a rotary polisher, because you cannot achieve a straight line with a pad that's constantly throwing itself 21 millimeters away from center. There are two parts to correction. There's cutting in and bulk correction. Bulk correction's the main flat big areas of the car. These are the easy bits to do. And the cutting in is all the detail. So edges of panels and around door handles and vents and antenna and things like that. You want to get all the cutting in done first, and then you do the bulk correction to fill in everything and complete the job. A detail with paint correction included that hasn't got the cutting in done properly is not really a good detail. And attempting to do a good detail with only a 21mm random orbit polisher, not the best way to go about it. So to wrap up, when you're purchasing a power tool for paintwork correction, the name of the game is to buy the best machine within a budget. A more expensive machine is of no use if it's the wrong tool for the job, and more decent quality machines that are together capable of achieving a better end result are better than one great machine that's slightly superior in one area. Get 2, or if you can, 3 machines to complete the job better, rather than spending a ton of money on the biggest, best, latest machine that's good for one specific thing but won't complete the job. If you're a beginner and if you only need one machine, you want probably an 8mm or a 15mm. I find the 15mm is probably the best all-rounder. Failing that, an 8mm. 21mm is after you have at least 1 or 2 of these machines. And try a rotary polisher and try to build your skill up, because when you do have the skill level that's required to make the most of a rotary polisher, it's not only extremely satisfying, but it's very, very efficient, and you get the best results from it. I hope you found this useful, at the very least entertaining. If you find that something I said is confusing or you think it's incorrect, never hesitate to ask, and I'll try my best to answer your questions. Thank you.